Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. I'm really pleased to introduce Dan Lyus next to me. I'll give an introduction to Dan in a second. Just first to introduce myself, I'm Nadia Alomar. I'm Clore Social Director of Marketing and External Relations. Unfortunately, Tracy Faraday-Drake could not join us this morning, so it's my pleasure to step in and have this conversation with Dan. I've got to say, healthcare is a topic that is incredibly close to my heart. I worked in a medical membership body for about 7, 8 years, and it was just having that access to those people and the work and the advancement that's going on was fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. So I think that's all from me. I'm really excited to introduce you to Dan Lyus. He is Director of Partnerships and Deputy CEO of Southwest Academic Health Science Network. In his role, Dan leads work to accelerate the adoption of innovative practice in healthcare for the long term. What does that mean? So currently, he's leading the network's support to leaders in the Southwest, assisting them to really lock into their work, the beneficial changes they experienced from the responses to the COVID-19 emergency. So that's what he's currently doing, and we'll ask Dan a little bit more about that in a second, but a little bit about how this all came about. So how did Dan the kind of transition to this? After graduating from university in Bath, Dan joined local government to use his passion and skills to improve life chances for vulnerable people. So his work since has been across the social care, mental health, drug and alcohol services, housing, care and support, and it's all allowed him to develop a holistic understanding, of the drivers of well-being. Dan's also a Clore Social Fellow, which we're incredibly proud of. And then I'd like to say, yeah, Dan, welcome. We'd love to hear more about yourself, a little bit more about your current role, please, and just bring that to life a little bit for us.
Sure. Morning, Nadia. Morning, everybody. Thanks for having me here. So, yeah, it's a pleasure. My current role, so our organization has this really important part to play, but it's in a really interesting position in the healthcare system. So we're a neutral organization. We're not for profit. We sit in the middle of a very complex adaptive health and care system. And I work across the counties, or we work across the counties of Somerset, Devon and Cornwall. And there's a big challenge in healthcare, really, which is how do you get great ideas, proven practice, to be spread across a healthcare system so that everybody can benefit from it? And our role is to really help accelerate the movement from proven practice into it being widely available to all those that should and deserve to have it. And I kind of help with that in my organization by running some business functions that have responsibility for building capability within the health and care workforce to adapt to change, as well as to practice new ways of working and embrace change and lead sort of the uptake of new ways. I also lead a business function that does evaluation and learning, where we evaluate the impact of new interventions in healthcare. We seek to find that learning very quickly and move it back in so that there's a constant iterative process of improvement. And kind of sat behind that, I suppose, is this, if we're doing all of that well, we're improving safety. And if we're improving safety, then we're improving outcomes for patients and we're improving patient experience. And when we do it particularly well, we're also improving sort of the experience of being a clinician, a nurse, a doctor, anybody in the health and care system, because the purpose that you joined, you feel that you're fulfilling it better. So there's a lot of weight we put on ourselves, but we're actually a very small part of a very complex system. So I hope that gives you a bit of a feeling. Is that enough, Nadia?
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, actually, just to kind of my understanding as well, does that take shape in the form of programs? Are you embedded in some of these teams? Like, how does that come about?
Sure. So we are embedded. Yeah. So we have a lot of programs. Some of them are sort of we're asked to do because the NHS at a national level has gone, this piece of proven practice, we now need you, the Academic Health Science Network, to put into place. And then we have programs of activity where we'll work right alongside hand in hand with clinicians and teams in healthcare to make that change happen. And there will be, kind of time limited, impactful pieces of work. But also, when you're building capability, so I have a kind of a way of explaining it, I suppose. You kind of think the building of the capability is like the fertility of the soil almost, within which all of the great practice occurs. So we have long, deep relationships with our system, where we're kind of, they're colleagues of ours, we're colleagues of theirs, and we're championing each other. Using Clore language, I think of them like courageous change makers. So we have these clinical leaders, and we've got their back, we're helping them, we're being inspired by them, and they're going on to do other things that we don't know about, but because we're with them. And then we have the programmatic approach, which is more like the sort of the trees and the plants in that environment that we're helping to flourish.
Brilliant, thank you. No, that's really helpful. And also really kind of, first of all, how interesting to be to be doing that right now with what's happened this year, which we'll come to in a second. But I suppose more about you, about your transition into that role, what, how that came about, your own personal kind of leadership journey, and the influences and the, what has brought you to this, what brought you to this?
Yeah. Well, I think my early leadership journey was quite boring in some respects. I think I was part of the problem. So, I came out of university and went straight into local government, and I suppose got good at being good at work and just like rose up. I was lucky to have opportunity, lucky to have people around me who thought I was doing good things, but I just kind of was playing the game of moving up a hierarchy. And I got, 4 or 5 different roles in the local authority. It gave me, more opportunity to have positive influence, but I don't think I was very conscious in what I was doing then. I think it was more like, oh, this is what work is. And then I suppose what happened for me is I started to become aware of, as you get towards the more senior levels, you start to observe other people's behavior and go, well, I'm not sure I'm in agreement with that. Either because you feel it personally, it's affecting you and your health and well-being, or it's starting to affect the teams that you're now responsible for. So at the point where I started to become, probably a lot more responsible for other people, and then I think my family probably gave me some sort of gentle sort of what's the word for it? There's just kind of prodding me a bit and going, come on, Dan, you're becoming a bit corporate here. Why are you just giving me these unemotional answers, etc. And I started to realize that I was completely somebody different outside of work than I was in work. And I started to then want to bring in more of my personality to work. And some people said to me, you need to do that. That's going to help you. As I started to do that, that consciousness about, hang on, I can treat people really well at work, just like I do outside, and actually things go better. So what's going on with this system, and that consciousness helped me. And then something happened, which, is really difficult for many people when it happens, but I look back on it as a blessing, which is I got made redundant from the housing association I was working in. And that just gave me the chance, because of the conditions I was in, the amount of time I knew ahead that was going to happen, to make some choices. So then I make some choices to enter into the charity sector, and to choose the organizations that I went for, which, it's a privileged position to be able to do that. And so then when I got into sort of an organization in Bristol that covered the west of England, that looked after sort of enabling older people and vulnerable disabled people to remain in the home of their choice through adaptations to their property and making sure it's warm and safe. When I got there, I was like determined, I suppose, determined not to do things as I had found that they were done to me. Use this consciousness and this gap that I'd had because of the redundancy to go a lot more intentional into work. And I started to realize that, these people that I was now leading and looking after and supporting, we weren't as productive as we could be. So it felt, if you put it in a dichotomy, you got 2 options. You work people harder and expect more, or you work differently and see if that works. And we decided to work them differently. And therefore, we started off a journey, which sounds counterintuitive, starting off a self-management journey with a decision of two people in the organization to go, I think we should do this. But then quickly it became everybody's sort of passion, if you like. Yeah, let's remove the hierarchy in our organization. Let's empower people at the front line to make decisions. Let's believe properly that leadership is an emergent characteristic as opposed to something that you get because you've got up a hierarchy. And we put that in place, and that, I think, that change there with the work I did with Clore probably led to me now being in healthcare. I could have been in healthcare a lot before, but I was always like really cautious about it. I thought that's not the culture for me. It sounds really tough in healthcare. But then having done this sort of like fundamental change of removing a hierarchy in an organization, empowering people, seeing how they really kind of grew and grew in their confidence and in their ownership and their accountability and responsibilities, then gave me the sort of impetus to say, well, what bigger impact could I have? Clore did that as well. You know, there's real good pieces of that course which get you to kind of just lift up. And so, yeah, that journey, I suppose, led me then to where I am now. And there's probably more to say about where I am now, maybe later on. So we'll maybe come back to that.
So you started by saying that this is going to be a bit of a boring one, and then you've probably given one of the most interesting answers that we've received. And I think it's just so interesting. Leadership is an emerging characteristic rather than something you get when you're up there, and it's just the parallels with, you know, with how we believe, what we believe is the case is amazing. That was, yeah, that was. I'm a bit taken aback by that answer. It's really, really insightful. So thank you for that. I think so. Talking about that, so there is lots to talk about your current role, but just to stick a little bit on the kind of that leadership notion and how it's perceived. It's funny how it's perceived very, very differently across the different sectors. So you've obviously had a range of different experience. What is your, like, how do you feel about how it's perceived in healthcare versus how it's perceived in the social sector?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, it is great to be in this position at this point in time, having learned so much about the social sector. And when I learned about the social sector, one of the ways in which, you know, I was often in this sort of business development sort of role. And so a lot of my time was actually spent working with healthcare to say, well, look, do you realize the quality and the opportunity and the lower cost, closer to the frontline community impact that's happening in charities? And how do I articulate that? So I've got to think about that a lot. And I think leadership in the social sector is just, you know, you've got this sort of, you've got the trust so often of a massive range of beneficiaries who, you know, they really feel your organization is there for them. And you're close to them and you can speak with an authenticity, which sometimes, you know, I'd feel quite awkward about. But when you're that smaller organization, you know, it's often a question of scale, this, because in healthcare, the scale is huge in many respects. So you can kind of go in the social sector. Leadership is often occurring in a smaller scale, closer to the front line, with a deeper level of understanding of the real public, I don't want to say the word patient because that's more the healthcare, but more citizen need, if you like, and citizen want, and citizen hope as well. There's more of that. And I think so. The leadership piece there is they're amazing people, often working in very difficult situations. You know, like the winds of change that surround charities, particularly, and how you're constantly trying to sort out the funding so that you can achieve your purpose, but then the funding keeps on taking you in different places. You know, to get that funding, you have to look at it in this way, and you have to you start ending up in danger of never achieving your purpose because you've had to fulfill the needs of the funders to get the money that, and it's a real struggle and a challenge. And I think the resources are low in terms of the amount of cash to invest in leadership support, but the collegiate atmosphere can be quite good. But I suppose I was a commissioner, and what I began to feel really uncomfortable about was how the commissioning environment actually pitted leaders in the social sector against each other. and created this false competitiveness. So there is a lot more to do, I think, in the social sector around sort of how we work as a system. But then if you come over to healthcare, so you might talk about sort of top-down control in healthcare. There's a lot of top-down control, whereas smaller organizations have more autonomy. Maybe in the social sector, but in healthcare, you've got that top-down control, but then you've got that bottom-up reactivity that's occurring all the time. Like there's an emergency, we're escalating in a hospital because we've suddenly had a lot of admissions. We've got a pandemic, we've got something. And it creates this sort of, how do we move towards that long-term purpose in healthcare, or how do we continue to fulfill the ambitions of the NHS when actually this is day to day, and this is frontline in a reactive manner. So there's a lot to learn in healthcare about that sort of the real deep purpose connection that charities and social sector can have. And there's a lot to learn, I think, in the social sector from healthcare about sort of its methodology. Healthcare has become really good. Obviously, it starts off years and thousands of years ago with a method of really thinking about what works, really being scientific in its nature about does this result in this, does this result in this, and it's that's there every day. I feel that sort of it's no good going in pitching something which is like wishy-washy. People just see through it and they go, where's the evidence? And so there is a methodology and an approach to improvement which is not universally there, but it's accepted that there's a way to do things in healthcare, and so there's less fragmentation. So the real way I look at health and social care and the social sector and the healthcare sector is for complementarity. These two, when I'm in a room with, and I'm lucky in some respects to be there, like you've maybe got a director of social services, and you've got somebody from public health, maybe the DPH in public health, and then you've got the sort of acute hospital CEOs. They get so much from each other, that they really do complement each other because they bring out the best in each other, and it can work really well. It's just so sad that actually at a systems level, we've still got a very, very long way to go. But that feels like the job, if you like. Part of my work is internal, and the other part is external. When I do external, I'm always now having to think about what's the systems leadership characteristics that I'm showing and that my team need to show in order to move this journey further along, so that we don't have a false split between the two. So I hope that's kind of useful and has got some way to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it begs the question, how has this changed this year? What has changed this year? What have you noticed? And yeah.
Well, I suppose one way to go at it would be to think about when I joined and what happened for me. So if that's all right, I'll start there. So I joined at the back end of last year into an organization going through a bit of change, but where I was like, okay, I really understand, done my work, this is the right time for me to enter healthcare. And then very shortly after, like 5 days in, I learned our chief executive was leaving. And we had a relatively small executive at that point. And so I'm like kind of learning the ways of the organization, learning our membership structure, the way in which we're funded, and all of these other aspects. And then the chief exec leaves and we move into an interim arrangement. And then like shortly after, we've got sort of January, and we've got pandemic sort of murmurings coming and the healthcare sector ramping up. And then suddenly, I still haven't really grasped what I'm doing because I'm so new. And we're into everybody's at home in our team, and yet the whole system's looking at us, and not in sort of the AHSNs aren't like massively vital part in terms of healthcare delivery, but everybody needed everything from every bit. And our help in allowing them to adapt to this change and to cope with this change was needed. And I felt these eyes on me, and I now reflect back on it and realize I was going for exactly the same as everybody else. What had basically happened is healthcare, as I've explained, it's like many people's sectors. It's a complex system. People call it a complex adaptive system, which means that things aren't linear. It's not like you change this and that just happens. Actually, there's so much complexity there. But once you can start to get your head around that, that's fine. You look for the emergent factors, outcomes that happen from your interventions, and you start to understand it, and then you iterate and you learn and you learn. COVID happens, and we all get thrown into chaos. So if you look, the model that I used for it, and I wish I'd have used it a few months earlier, was Dave Snowden's Cynefin framework. And that kind of explains this, when you're in complexity, what happens, when you're in chaos, what happens. So we all moved into chaos at that point. And those that did best, and we learned this retrospectively, were those who could quite swiftly almost put a container around what they were doing, put some boundaries back around what they were doing, around their own capability, around the needs in the system, and around sort of their ability to change it, and then to go, okay, this is where we're going to work. And I think what the healthcare system did brilliantly with its emergency response is it set up these cells. So suddenly you've got all of the emergency system, the EPPR they call it, and all of these cells get set up, focused on different bits. You've got PPE, you've got sort of recovery already starts to be thought about quite early on, and then you've got rehabilitation, and you've got all these different bits of cells going on. But those cells themselves are suddenly quite flat, because the people that have come into them haven't worked with each other before, and the conditions have suddenly changed. So it's what I started to see, and what we've noticed from this work is that what happened during the pandemic was a real loosening of the previous tight conditions of control and bureaucracy and organizational sort of treating the delivery like a machine. Suddenly it got loosened in chaos. We moved into sort of some boundaries, but those boundaries of ways of delivering things through cells and ways of working had a more permissive culture within them. They had more flexibility. There was more definitely more resources. The funding was good, if you like, so that helped. But there was a collaborative approach, and looking at it now and thinking about what was achieved, given how tough that was, feels really impressive. I'm so proud of so many of the people in those cells who coped with that, and everyone's still coming into work day on, day out, and you think what they've all been through. So it's, I think healthcare will have learned a lot. Part of our task now, and I'd love to talk about it more, I suppose, is like, how do you keep that? Because I think there's something beautiful in that. And I think there's something that, speaks to that self-management journey I'd had previously. So yeah, would it be helpful to talk about that?
Yeah, I was going to say, that leads us on nicely to the next thing I was going to ask, which is listening to that. How do you? Do you in that culture?
Yeah, and I think our organization and AHSN as the network, we've really got our heads around this quite well, I think, because the task of spreading innovation around a healthcare system, in one respect, sounds obvious. It's really simple, surely. It's proven. Why isn't everybody doing it? But we have this model, like an iceberg model, which I'm sure other people use as well. And you kind of imagine that above the water, you've kind of got just events, the stuff that happens day to day. And so you could kind of imagine it's proven. Let's just put it in place. That's above the water. That's kind of simple. But then you've got everything that happens beneath the water, which is more about our history, our sort of mental models, our sort of organizational structures, the kind of the systems that have, and the status quo that's kind of existed for so long, as well as our own fatigue, our own personal resources. And all of these things, as well as the uniqueness of individual places. Basically, it's culture, I'd say. Beneath the water is culture. All of that can prevent stuff actually happening. Doesn't matter that it's proven, it just doesn't happen because you've got all those barriers. And we all sit in the meetings with the no but answer, or yes but, sorry, yes but that won't work because, and that's really obvious, you know, and that is true. That mindset which comes from a culture can stop all this stuff. So as an AHSN, we've really focused on understanding that, and we have an approach which kind of goes, well, what's with this innovation when it worked in this context? Let's go deep. Let's go really deep into understanding what it is in this context that made it work. And you get beyond the intervention quite quickly. You know, it's relatively easy to see an intervention that might have a controlled evaluation prove that it works, but you get to the people who put it into place, and you get to the tools that they used or the tools that they have, the resilience and all these pieces. And so in COVID, we've got a great team, evaluation and learning team, that I look after, and we do some rapid cycle learning. So less of the traditional sort of long-term evaluation, just get in there, observe it in the moment, comment on it in the moment, and feed that back in to help people work out how to use their learning. We got commissioned in Cornwall, in Somerset, in Devon to undertake rapid cycle learning on their COVID response. And there's a great blog on our website from a colleague of mine called Sarah on the sort of the 8 conditions that enabled rapid change during COVID. So I'll just rattle through those. But whilst explaining how we establish them. So you've got, like, one of them is adaptability. So when you get really close to teams in healthcare during COVID, looking at what they've done, you realize that, you know, they aren't just grabbing something that's worked somewhere else and just doing the same thing. They're tweaking it to their circumstance. And you've got to be open to going, okay, I can slightly adapt this recipe because my needs are different. So when you've got an approach that allows you to adapt something, sat beneath a very clear shared purpose, within a team structure that has significant psychological safety, where you are essentially going, what were the barriers that existed previously, and how do we remove some of these barriers now that we've got more freedoms? You add that together to some extra resources, which always help. And then you take a collaborative mindset that says, no one of us can solve this. Because that COVID really helped in that respect, to kind of put everyone back in their place and go, look, this is bigger than anybody in any organization. And then a commitment to communication, which I'm not fully sure where it came from, apart from everybody just being hungry. You know, like, we were all hungry to know what the hell was happening. So we actually communicated more. You put all those together. I think I've mentioned 8. I might have missed collaborative mindset. So I can't explain to you fully why then rapid change happened. But what we've noticed in the 3 systems that we've looked at quite a lot of depth now is that those 8 conditions always existed, but they existed together at the same time. So there's something within that. And actually, as you look at those 8 conditions against previous work at the AHSN Network and the Health Foundation on their great document called the Spread Challenge, they actually ring true. And I think they ring true for a lot of us anyway. You know, if it feels safe, if you've got some resources, if people are collaborative, if there's a shared common purpose, if we're being prepared to be adaptable and flexible, well, actually, we're probably going to do some good work. And that's really what I think has happened in COVID, when the best things, best outcomes, or the best responses, those conditions are all playing out together. So I hope that helps.
And that's gold dust. It doesn't just help. It's brilliant. And I'm going to we've already got someone through saying, could you please repeat them? And I think we're going to get quite a few emails from participants asking for more info. So could you maybe, just for the benefit of our colleagues at Clore, could you just repeat the name? I think you said Sarah from.
Yeah. So here you go. In the chat, there's the.
Oh, perfect. Oh, that's lovely.
So yeah, Sarah Rubens. Absolute privilege to be her line manager. She's done great work there with the rest of the team. Nice little blog, and we're going to build on it, because I suppose the next challenge is, how do you keep them?
Right.
Should we talk? Do you want me to talk about that, Nadia?
Please.
The challenge of keeping it, because
yes, please.
I imagine everybody's experiencing this at the moment. Stuff's moved, like, when was it? When I'm trying to think when the first lockdown ended, but there was so much energy from many people to keep the conditions in place that it enabled some real positive change to happen. And then there was a real fear from us all about some of these really good things slipping away. And I think in healthcare, because of, as I said, you know, you've got the reactive nature of the day-to-day plus the very top-down nature of how do you run a system this complex in a way that reduces unwarranted variation. You get quite a lot of top-down approaches. And that actually then starts to bring back in some of the factors that can play against the conditions that enabled the rapid change to happen. So the task now, I think the writing on it from academics kind of expresses what happened in COVID as being like it's like an adaptive window or something. You've got these really tight conditions and then they loosen. And COVID, they loosened, and it's how do you keep that loosened place going for long enough that when you fix it back, it's locked in the benefits. And that's now the task. So one of the things is you have to talk about it repeatedly, and you have to engage people and allow them to go, yes, I did feel that, I did see that, and that is really important, because we're also damn busy, aren't we? That actually we're creatures of habit. We revert back, you know, it's not long before we, I walk the dog every morning and I always take the same route unconsciously without kind of properly thinking I could do this differently. So we've got that challenge. You've then got the system going, no, we agree that we need to change our approach. And that's going on at the moment. So the AHSN networks with a whole range of other parties are taking part in something called the Beneficial Changes Network, which Simon Stevens has kind of put in place in the NHS to capture all of those beneficial changes that happened as a result of those conditions being in place. So, you know, those conditions come into place that I've gone through, and then teams do great work. It might be on how do you support patients to still have appointments, but through video as opposed to face-to-face. And something that they've, you know, struggled with for 4 years previously has suddenly been solved in 3 weeks. And how do you then keep that going? So this is being sort of looked at now, and we're being asked to work on it. I think where it comes back to is actually where I started, which is a dangerous, you know, I've got to question it, but it comes back to what are the conditions that you need in place for people to do this? Well, you need to build their capability. You need them to be confident and resourced and to be owning this change themselves. So how are we keeping that ground fertile for the long term? And that's an AHSN role that we need to do. Then how are you sort of giving them the tools and the support to take their programs forward in a very systematic, evidenced way where they learn quickly? And that's the sort of the programs that we deliver. And how related to both are you doing evaluation and learning to just check back and to feed back in what's being learned to keep that in place? You know, and so I look after the building capability bit in our team. I look after the evaluation and learning bit, and I work very closely with the programs bit. So it's a privileged position to be in to try and do this. But, you know, there's 15 AHSNs, we're all trying to assist. There's a whole range of other organizations like the Health Foundation and others, King's Fund, who are trying to assist. But the NHS is absolutely massive, you know, and more challenges will come. So it's a long, hard piece of work, but it feels really, really important. You know, it feels most important, I suppose, because we can't be the answer. It's got to be the people doing the job in healthcare who are the answer. So if we can give them the skills, the support, so that they own this, it's like that, you know, teach a person to fish thing. That's our job. And it's like in the social sector, you know, so many of us in the social sector, we're trying to make ourselves almost redundant because we wanted our charity not to be needed. It's actually the same with what we need to do in healthcare.
Thank you. And that, I think that brings us nicely to a question that was asked in the chat. And someone asked if you could provide an example of a recent kind of success in your work, whether it was something you as a network delivered or in collaboration with others, something you're,
yeah. So I suppose the team are really proud of the work that they did with primary care, so GPs in the early stage of the pandemic, to get them to rapidly adapt their system so that they could still see or talk to patients as they needed to. I think loads of us got really concerned about this fact, about the sort of members of the public being fearful of going out of their homes, fearful of using healthcare, and yet probably needed it because they had pre-existing conditions. So our team have done a few things. One was allowing GP practices the skills, the information, the support to practically put in place video consultation and just phone systems sufficient, you know, to very practical stuff. And actually the levels of sort of numbers of GP practices in the counties that we supported to get up to using non-face-to-face forms of triage was really, really high, some of the best in the country. So the team are proud of that. But I think that one of the reasons that worked is because we also had a parallel program going in our organization on social prescribing. So we've been working very closely with primary care for many years about really understanding how to enable social prescribing to work well. Now, I'm aware that I'm talking to an audience here in the social sector who get social prescribing because they're basically probably quite annoyed that healthcare have kind of grabbed that space. It's basically what they do, and it's what I used to do. But it's really important that this isn't that sort of split, actually, that we're working in partnership. And we were always, our organization's been working from the healthcare side with GPs, with their link workers, with the charities that they maybe subcontract the link working through or partner with, to work out what helps with social prescribing. And we have these test beds in the AHSN whereby we've got 5 PCNs doing brilliant stuff in social prescribing, and we've been helping them to work out why it was what they were doing was brilliant, what was having an impact. Then COVID hit. And the real success was that those that were understanding what made them good, that were constantly seeking to progress, suddenly their responses to COVID were amazing. So, you know, this is like within days, they have got door to door, street to street, sort of volunteers within their community who are already checked, already sort of compliant with any regulations, who can go and check on people to see if they're okay. Now, if you think what's happening in the rest of the country around this time, early stages, you know, you're probably just starting to get a WhatsApp group in your local street, maybe. There's all this talk about national volunteers through the Good Sam piece going on, and like, oh wow, isn't it amazing? We've got 500,000 volunteers, and then it takes weeks for them to start to be assigned to stuff. But these social prescribing teams, who are already in touch with their population, already thinking about vulnerability, not as like you're vulnerable because you're coming for an appointment, but possibly you're vulnerable because you're not coming for an appointment, and how do I understand and get out to you? Creating volunteers locally and ways of connecting into pharmacies, you know, just people on bikes, picking up stuff in masks with gloves, but, you know, picking up medicines, delivering it to doors, other people doing the shopping, but doing it at a whole town, whole village level. So Ilfracombe's a great one. And it's another thing that's probably on our website. Well, it definitely is. We've got a nice little case study on what they've done in North Devon. And, you know, our help there has just enabled them to do it at scale. And yeah, I think the team are really proud of those pieces. There's others certainly. But the key thing is that this isn't, what we do isn't actually about us and our organization. The successes occur within the health system by the people that we support in the background.
Yeah, of course, completely, and I do get that. It is also, however, testament to your team as well. And something you mentioned at the beginning that was picked up by one of our participants who wanted, sorry, a little bit more clarification on the 2 people decision. Sounds great, is what they said. I think something that you said at the beginning about that yeah. And if you could tell us a little bit more about how that works, and is this something that you are currently kind of working in?
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember what we meant by that one, or what I meant by that one. So
I think you were talking about empowering others. It's not just up to, yeah. So it's empowering those on the front line to act as lead. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what I mean, I suppose, is well, I'll give you an example. So I run a lot of meetings as circles, which becomes a little bit more interesting on Zoom and Teams, but you basically do the same thing. And I'm sure lots of people do this, but it's a very deliberate methodology, because how do you democratize decision making, and how do you get like a diversity of experience into your decision making, where you need to get all voices, And unless you truly believe that everybody's got something to give, you end up just allowing whoever wants to speak. And often that's the people who are either most confident or have got positional power. So it's really important, I think, when in this sort of more flattened approach to bring in others. And the sat behind that is a real feeling that best decisions are made closest to the front line. Like, what do I really know about what's happening? You know, I'm like removed from it. So let's get to the people who are crossing the doorstep, you know, who are out there, and let's really listen to them properly. And that requires a lot of like giving up of what you've previously gained. So if you think about that early stage in my career, I'm climbing some sort of ladder here, gaining stuff, which is gaining power and money by being up a hierarchy. And then it's like, well, how do I hold on to this? Because I've now got it and I need it and I've probably got a mortgage to pay, etc. And in a self-managing structure, you kind of got to go, but all of those things I've gained are kind of false, because what's really the quality of what we're doing is not good enough. And therefore I can either carry on putting stress on myself to look like and sound like I'm the best person to make this decision, or I can find a way to bring others into it. And that's the task, I think, that we have now, particularly, is, you know, we've got to get a wider audience, a wider set of voices into this. And COVID has shown that. You know, it's so sad, isn't it, that it takes a pandemic again to point out all of the inequalities in our system. But they exist, and they existed for so long, probably because of the very fact that we haven't involved the people who matter most in creating the structures and the decision processes. So yeah, I think that's maybe the answer to the question, but I can't be certain.
It's a good one. It sounds good. So go with it. No, very valid. So I'm more from the participants now, and one came in previously when someone registered for it through the Eventbrite system. Is they would like that they've asked. They'd be interested to hear reflections on whistleblowing, speaking truth to power during the pandemic. And I'll go through the chat and the Q&A now to find some others.
Sure. So I think whistleblowing, the need to whistleblow is a symptom of a situation. And I'm more interested in how do you put in place the circumstances where that need isn't there. So I'm thinking, you know, I mentioned earlier psychological safety. It's a term that I've come to learn what it means and feel really comfortable with it. There's some great speakers and work on it. I think it's Amy Edmondson is a good name to look up around psychological safety. I'm sure everybody is very aware of it. But, you know, creating the conditions where people can contribute their concerns, their questions, and be part of the discussion at such an early stage and continuously, and creating the conditions where the others in the discussion will listen and respond, as opposed to sort of ignore and just kind of move on. They're all the vital components that with others around sort of transparency of information, etc., that mean that decisions are made better. And when you do all of those things, obviously you don't need to whistleblow, because there isn't so much going on that is of deep concern. So yeah, so much of our work, as we pull together cross-organizational, cross-sector groups to work on projects of change, is to not jump too deeply into the work before we've created the team and we've started to create the conditions. And it's absolutely, you know, like energizing when you do that, because you have a real quality of meeting where people feel safe and they can say stuff and others can respect it. So yeah, I hope that's an okay perspective to answer that question.
Thank you. Yes, and we've actually got quite a few coming through. There's one from Shaq Scott, our CEO, from Clore Social, and she says the NHS it's huge, cumbersome, beloved, unique, a global phenomenon. Is there a leadership culture, or is it random and accidental? And does the leadership make the organisation special in any way? Is it special because of size and funding? That's
It's nice to see Shax continues to want to challenge me. Hi Shax. So is it random? I don't think it is random, and I don't think it's accidental. But then I suppose I don't really want to go down the route of even thinking it's that way, because where do you start? You know, that doesn't give you a methodology to affect the change within. I think it's there for many reasons of culture, many reasons of unique factors that occur, but they all coalesce and result in it for a reason. So I don't see it as random. I see it as, it's kind of like, well, we get what we deserve in some respects. And I think what we've got in the NHS is a brilliant set of, you know, like real caring, compassionate human beings. Like I was worried about going into the NHS just from an outsider perspective, because I used to go into meetings from you know, the charities I'd work in, and the housing associations, and even when I was in local government, and I used to find my colleagues in health like being really challenging of me in a way that made me almost feel like a bit naked, like, God, yeah, I don't have the evidence behind it. So I used to think, God, that must be a really tough place to work, but it isn't. It's a place where they have a different mindset about how to deliver change. Once you start to understand that, and then you spend time with the people, everybody's just, you know, we're all the same. So the caring of the wider determinants of healthcare not being looked at enough, prevention not happening enough, everybody in health feels that as much as the people in social care feel that, and in the social sector. So we're all basically the same, but the conditions within which we work, the operating environments are different, and that creates the uniqueness of a leadership style within the NHS, which is, well, this is how I get stuff done. And I think it is different, and it is more pointed in ways, it's more precise, it's more programmatic, it's more mechanical at the moment. But I see reasons to think that it is becoming slightly more organic. And I think that's good, you know, that's my leaning. But you can't go too far the other way within healthcare, because, you know, there's so many reasons why you don't want to mess with the machine, because, you know, there's safety, you know, and you've really got to be careful. So small tests of change are vitally important. I don't know if I fully answered Chat's question, but I've maybe answered the bit of it I can. So.
No, that's great. Thank you. And then another one came in. Do you work on behaviour change programs for prevention, as well as a frontline perspective? And this came in from Nigel Shattuck.
Thanks, Nigel. So
as well.
A little bit, I'd say if you go back to sort of what happened in COVID, it became really important to go, where are we strongest and where is the need greatest? And where, when we put our strengths against that need, can we have most impact? So at this point in time, we aren't doing, you know, like well, certainly not the majority of the work we're doing is more around prevention. However, each program we get involved with clearly has an aspect of that. So some people might be hearing in the news at the moment around NHS Think 111 First, which is an approach being put in place to enable safe delivery of emergency department care, by the fact that we don't have loads of numbers of people going into EDs unnecessarily, when actually we haven't got enough room for them because we've had to increase the spacing because of the infection risk. And so that's quite a, you could say that's quite a reactive thing. It's emergency care. But of course, the messaging that you create and how you think about how people look after their healthcare takes you immediately to, well, if we just engaged with people earlier, then we'd actually have lower demand. And we do a load of work with primary care, and there's a piece of jargon, I suppose, to outsiders within healthcare and social care, I suppose, called population health management, which is trying to encourage primary care to look out into its population before they arrive for appointments. And so that is behavioral change. You know, so much of that is behavioral change. How do you create the conditions where somebody who's maybe got so probably not a proper medical term, but like poverty-induced stress and anxiety, how do you create the conditions where they actually feel that they're going to get a really good outcome by going to their GP? And a lot of that is, how do we build the capability and the empathy and the understanding and the skill set of the GPs to actually look at the wider aspects of a person, as opposed to that you're presenting with a cough, I'll deal with the cough, as you know, but hang on, this cough is manifesting itself because of this, this, and this. So we do get involved a bit, Nigel, but not as much as we as an organization would like at this moment in time. But I think that's coming. We're setting a 5-year strategy, and I think that will take us in that direction.
Thank you. And then an interesting, another really good one actually from Shax is, in the last year we've learned that there are many kinds of leadership, and we've really witnessed 2 kinds that have kind of pitched each other against each other. Sorry. So there's expert leadership, and then there's political leadership. And what are your thoughts on this? And the big, who will emerge as the winner?
So Nadia, we had a very slight glitch. You said there's expert leadership and then there's
political leadership.
Political leadership. Brilliant. Okay. Well, and like you said, there's a whole load of other forms of leadership as well. I think if we take expert leadership, I was having this discussion last night actually. So we're privileged enough to be doing some small amount of work with the Exeter Nightingale Hospital. And I was trying to work with my team who support me as we work out how to support that hospital, set up safety systems, learning systems, with, should we be providing expert leadership here? Or should we actually, be doing more compassionate leadership, and understanding the situation they're in and working with them and following and wrapping around. And it's just a mix, isn't it? It's always a mix. So I didn't pit anything against anything really. I take the circumstance you're in and then you deploy the method that the best works. So I'm using, I'm sure at certain times, political leadership. I'm using expert leadership in some areas, and I'm bringing others in to, lead as coach in certain instances and to be empathetic. You've just got to judge your circumstance and use your tools accordingly. I think Clore did something great. I was on one of their courses and we had some acting coaches. And that really enabled me to realize that I can lead in a variety of different ways while still being authentically me. And that's really important, because I get involved in meetings in healthcare, and I'd love to explain to them the theory about why I think psychological safety is important, but they don't want that. They just want me to do something, just sort this thing out, Dan, so then you go straight in and you do leadership in the moment by practically taking control. And at other times it's like you're back with the team, you're adapting again. So I'm not answering your question head on, Shax. It's circumstance driven, I'd say.
Thank you. We've only got a few minutes really, but there's one that is kind of that I would genuinely really like to know, and we've been asked a few times already on the chat and previously when someone submitted a question to Eventbrite. In your experience, what are the most powerful ways of developing leadership skills in yourself and in others around you?
So coaching, when I started to engage with coaching, it was dramatic, its effect, because it actually solved a big problem that I had. So I used to spend a lot of my time trying to develop my team by basically explaining to them what I did and then getting disappointed that they never followed through and did what I did. I was like, well, if you just did this, you'd be fine. And then I realized that, they have to find the answer within themselves, and coaching does that. And it's a great, kind method. And I think it's really good. So I think it is a powerful way of developing leadership. I actually have now come to the view that there's a more powerful way for me than coaching, but I probably wouldn't have got there had I not done coaching. And I think it's transforming through the discussion, and it's transforming through listening. So coaching is kind of retrospective, it's on the side, you're kind of going to your coach and having a discussion about a problem that you've experienced and then trying to. But this happens here, we haven't got time. You're dealing with the challenge in the moment. And if the moment stresses you out and locks you up, then the next moment's going to be worse. So finding your way to be conscious in this moment, step back and go, what's going on for me here? when you're saying this thing that's making me feel uncomfortable, how can I use that to grow myself? And that's a really empowering tool. I find it's really difficult, but I could have, I spent a lot of my childhood, I think, shying away from confrontation. Things happened that meant that I just try to keep everybody happy. And then as I've become like, now I suppose, I realize that I need to look straight into confrontation and find the richness within it to find the learning to move on to the next thing. So that's really transformative for me. That's the way in which I think I'm developing my leadership, is problems are opportunities for me to grow and to help others. So don't shy away from them, look straight into them and try and work on yourself in the moment. Easier said than done. but that's the job I think I've got now. And I really like it. And it makes me feel brave, which then makes me feel proud. So yeah, I believe in it.
Well, it might be easier said than done, but it's a brilliant message, and it's something that we can all take away. And actually, everything you've said has been really inspiring and really helpful to everyone, whatever sector they're from. You've mentioned one of the most difficult sectors, obviously, this year. So a massive thank you, Dan, for joining us. It's been an education, and just, yeah, a big thank you from all of us. If anyone does want to continue this conversation, please do go to Twitter. You're more than welcome to just to remember to use the hashtag and to tag both Clore Social and Dan. The link to Dan's Twitter and ours as well should be on the chat. So please do that. We will have leaders now every month, so we will be in touch very soon with everyone with the details of the next one. But for now, Dan, thank you so much for your time. This has been really wonderful. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Nadia. Thank you very much. Thanks for setting these things up. I really enjoyed it. I hope it was useful.
Definitely was. Thank you. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Take care, everyone.